Your bride has my mom's bracelet. The little black girl's voice was barely louder than the rustle of silk in the front row. But Graham Whitmore's hand stopped in midair. The wedding ring slipped from his fingers, struck the marble once, and rolled in a bright circle between him and his bride. Caroline Vance turned so pale that even her pearl earrings seemed warmer than her face. 3 hours earlier, the ballroom at the Whitmore estate had smelled of white roses, lemon polish, and a perfume Graham did not recognize. Something sharp beneath the sweetness, like flowers left too long in a locked room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the Chesapeake, turning the gardens silver. Inside, 400 guests waited beneath chandeliers the size of frozen waterfalls, while string musicians tested the same gentle phrase over and over. Graham stood in a private side room, dressed in a black tuxedo tailored in Milan, staring at the wedding ring in his palm as if it belonged to another man. At 45, Graham Whitmore owned hotels, hospitals, shipping lines, and half the skyline people admired from the harbor. He had security outside the chapel doors, lawyers near the first row, and a mother who could silence a scandal with one look. Still, the ring felt heavier than it should have. Caroline stepped in behind him, beautiful, composed, perfect in lace. She touched his sleeve and asked if he was ready. Graham nodded because men like him were expected to be ready. He did not notice the faint red mark around her wrist, the shape of something recently removed. He did not notice his mother, Evelyn, watching Caroline's hand instead of her face. And he did not notice the small girl in the catering hallway, pressed against the wall beside a cart of untouched champagne glasses, clutching a blue handkerchief to her chest. Amara Brooks had entered through the service door with wet shoes and a dress too thin for the rain. One braid had come loose near her cheek. In her pocket was a folded hospital bill with her mother's name on it, Monique Brooks, and under the handkerchief was the only thing her mother had made her promise never to sell: a silver bracelet, old and dull, with a bent clasp and 2 tiny letters carved inside. M.B. Amara had seen it once on her mother's wrist in a photograph. Then she had seen it again in a newspaper clipping, shining on Caroline Vance's arm at a bridal fitting. That was why she came. Not for money, not for pity, not even because she was angry. She came because her mother had died whispering that some lies wore white dresses. When the wedding began, Amara waited behind the last row until Graham lifted the ring. Her knees trembled, but her hand did not open. A guard reached for her shoulder when she stepped into the aisle. She looked past him and said the sentence her mother had left her. Your bride has my mom's bracelet. Laughter moved through the guests first, thin and embarrassed. Caroline smiled as if the child had spilled punch instead of blood from the past. Sweetheart, she said softly, you must be lost. But Graham was no longer looking at the girl's shoes or her cheap dress. He was looking at the bracelet. Amara opened it with both thumbs, and under the tiny engraved initials was a scratch shaped like a star. Graham's breath caught so hard the priest heard it, because 20 years earlier he had made that mark himself. For one breath, Graham Whitmore forgot the ballroom, the cameras, the priest, the woman in white waiting with her hand extended. He only saw that tiny star-shaped scratch, cut crooked into old silver, the mark he had made in a rented apartment 20 years ago when he dropped the bracelet on a kitchen tile and Monique had laughed like it did not matter. Then the room came back all at once. A woman in the second row gasped. Someone whispered that the child was stealing from the bride. A man near the aisle muttered, "This is a setup." Caroline's smile returned carefully, not wide enough to look guilty, not small enough to look afraid. She stepped down from the altar with the soft patience of a person approaching a stray dog. Sweetheart, she said, that is a very serious thing to say in front of all these people. Amara did not move. The guard's hand still hovered near her shoulder, but she had tucked the bracelet back into the blue handkerchief and held it with both fists against her chest. It was my mom's, she said. Her name was Monique. Graham's eyes shifted at the name just once, but Caroline saw it. Evelyn Whitmore saw it too. Graham's mother rose from the front row, silver hair perfect, pearls still, voice low enough to sound civilized. Graham, let security handle this. The poor child is confused. Poor child. The words traveled across the marble colder than rain. Amara lowered her eyes for half a second, not in shame, but as if placing the insult somewhere she could examine later. A family attorney in a navy suit stepped forward and murmured about liability, event disruption, possible theft. The priest closed his book without meaning to. The orchestra stopped. For a moment, the only ordinary sound in that impossible room was a silver spoon tapping nervously against a water glass at the catering station. Then Amara reached into the pocket of her thin dress and pulled out a photograph folded so many times the white crease ran through the middle like a scar. "I brought proof," she said. Caroline's expression changed before the picture was even opened. Not fear exactly. Calculation. Graham noticed because men who had spent their lives in negotiations learned the difference between surprise and adjustment. Amara held the photo up with both hands. It showed a younger Graham standing outside a Baltimore jazz club, tie loosened, smiling in a way no one in that ballroom had seen him smile in years. Beside him stood a black woman with warm eyes and dark braids pinned back from her face. Around her wrist was the silver bracelet. On the back, in fading blue ink, were the words, "Graham and Monique, when he still heard me." Graham did not take the photo right away. He only looked at the handwriting. His mouth tightened. Caroline laughed softly, but it landed wrong. "Old pictures can be found anywhere," she said. "A child should not be used like this." Amara turned her face toward her. "Then why did you delete my mother's voicemail?" The room went still again, deeper this time. Caroline blinked once. Graham's hand slowly lowered from the ring pillow. "What voicemail?" he asked so quietly that the question sounded more dangerous than shouting. Amara unfolded the photograph one more inch and revealed a small hospital sticker pressed to the back, with Monique Brooks's name, the date from 3 weeks ago, and a handwritten note in black pen. "Called Mr. Whitmore's office twice. Bride answered second call." Graham read the hospital sticker twice without touching it, as if the ink itself could accuse him. "Called Mr. Whitmore's office twice. Bride answered second call." The words were small, written by someone who had probably been standing under fluorescent lights with a clipboard pressed to her hip, too busy to know she was recording the edge of a life. Caroline's face did not break. That was what frightened Graham first. Innocent people looked confused. Caroline looked organized. "Hospitals write things down wrong all the time," she said, her voice soft enough for the guests to believe she was being kind. "Reception desks misunderstand names. Children misunderstand adults. This is a wedding, Graham." Amara looked at her then, not with anger, but with the steady exhaustion of a child who had already watched grown-ups explain away too much. "The nurse had purple glasses," she said. "She smelled like peppermint gum. She told my mom she was sorry because the first call went to a man named Peter, and the second call went to a woman who said not to call again." Graham's eyes moved, almost imperceptibly, toward the man in the navy suit. Peter Hensley, his family attorney, stopped breathing for half a second before smoothing the front of his jacket. It was a tiny motion, the kind most people would have missed, but Graham had built companies by watching men lie before they knew they were lying. "Peter," Graham said calmly, "did my off thin and yellowed from age. My mom said if I ever saw the bracelet on another woman, I had to find you before you said yes." Graham took the paper at last. His fingers barely brushed Amara's, and he felt how cold her hand was. The note was written in Monique's hand. There was no mistaking it now, not the slanted M, not the way she crossed her T too hard. "If you ever see this bracelet on another woman, find Graham Whitmore before he says yes." He read it once, then a second time while Caroline stepped closer. "Graham, please. You are letting a stranger's child humiliate me." Amara's chin lifted. "I'm not a stranger's child to my mother." The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Graham looked down at the bracelet again. The blue handkerchief had fallen open just enough for the silver to catch the chandelier light. He reached toward it, then stopped. "Open it," he said quietly. Amara pressed both thumbs to the bent clasp. It clicked with a small tired sound. Inside the bracelet, beyond the initials and the star-shaped scratch, was a line so faint it almost disappeared in the tarnish. When the room gets loud, find me. Graham went still. 20 years vanished so violently he almost swayed. Monique standing in the corner of a charity gala, pretending not to hear two women laugh at her second-hand dress. Graham taking her hand in the hallway and whispering those exact words because he had been too weak to defend her in the room. No one else had heard him. No one. Across from him, Evelyn whispered, "Graham, don't." And that was when he understood the first clue had not arrived at his wedding by accident. Evelyn's whisper did not sound like fear to the guests who could still see her from the aisle. It sounded like control. Within seconds, that control moved through the room in polished shoes and quiet instructions. The orchestra was told to resume a soft background piece, not loud enough to hide the silence, only polite enough to pretend the silence had manners. Two security men stepped between Amara and the nearest row of guests. Peter Hensley leaned toward Graham with the smooth, careful face of a man who had ended lawsuits before breakfast. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "we need to remove the child from the public area, preserve the dignity of the ceremony, and determine whether any property has been taken." Amara looked smaller under the chandeliers than she had in the aisle. The marble floor reflected her scuffed shoes. Her thin dress had a rain stain near the hem. Around her, everything gleamed. Diamond pins, champagne flutes, white roses imported from California, name cards embossed in gold. It was not that anyone shouted at her. That would have been easier to understand. They were gentle. They were civilized. They lowered their voices as if kindness could make contempt harder to prove. "Come with us, honey," one of the security men said. "Let the adults sort this out." Amara did not move. She folded the note, placed it behind the photograph, and wrapped the bracelet again inside the blue handkerchief. "Adults already sorted it once," she said. "That's why my mom died with secrets under her bed." The guard's hand dropped to his side. Graham heard it. He heard the sentence cut through the music, and for a moment he saw not an interruption, but a child standing exactly where every powerful person in the room wanted her not to stand. Caroline stepped closer, her veil trembling slightly when the air conditioning touched it. "Graham," she said, still soft, "look at what is happening. She admits she has my bracelet. She admits she came through the service entrance. Someone coached her." Amara turned to her. "Nobody coached me." "Then how did you get into my bridal suite?" Caroline asked. The question was sharp, and only after she said it did the room seem to notice its edge. Graham's eyes lifted. Peter's jaw tightened. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. Amara looked down at the handkerchief, then back at Caroline. "I followed the bracelet," she said. "Not you." She reached into the deep pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, softened at the corners from being opened too many times. It showed Caroline at a bridal fitting in New York, laughing beside a designer, one hand raised to touch her veil. On that wrist was the bracelet. "I saw it here first," Amara said. "Then I came today. I waited by the kitchen because rich people don't look at children holding trays." The humiliation in the sentence was so plain that no one knew where to place their eyes. Graham took the clipping. The date was 11 days after Monique Brooks had died. Caroline exhaled, almost relieved, as if she had found the clean explanation. "A bracelet like that could be purchased anywhere," she said. "And if she was near my suite, then she stole it from my dressing table." Peter nodded quickly, grateful for a shape he could use. "That is sufficient reason to end this discussion." But Amara's face did not change. She only opened the blue handkerchief again and pointed to the clasp. "Then why did you tell the guard it was missing before I ever walked into your room?" Caroline's mouth parted, then closed with the careful discipline of someone choosing a safer sentence. "Because my attendant noticed it was gone," she said. "That is what people do when jewelry goes missing." It sounded reasonable, sounded clean. It sounded like the kind of explanation that could survive in front of donors and board members and cameras. But Graham did not look at Caroline when she said it. He looked at the guard. The man stood near the side aisle, broad-shouldered and embarrassed, one hand resting near the radio clipped to his belt. Who told you the bracelet was missing? Graham asked. The guard swallowed. Mrs. Whitmore's office informed security, sir. Evelyn's expression did not move, but something around her eyes tightened. My office was simply helping Caroline, she said. The poor girl was minutes from walking down the aisle. Poor girl. Amara heard it and glanced at Caroline in the white gown worth more than her mother's hospital bills. She said nothing. Instead, she reached into her dress pocket again, deeper this time, past the photograph and the note, and pulled out a small brown envelope with a pharmacy label stuck crooked across the front. The envelope had been folded until its corners were soft. My mom kept this with the bracelet box, she said. Peter Hensley stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, I strongly advise against accepting more unverified items from a minor. Graham held out his hand anyway. Amara did not give it to him immediately. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. For a second she looked every bit her age, a child guarding the last dry thing in a storm. You have to promise not to let them take it, she said. Graham's voice lowered. I promise. Only then did she place it in his palm. Inside was a receipt printed on thin white paper, the ink beginning to fade. At the top were the words Vance Charitable Acquisitions. Below that, a storage unit number in West Baltimore. The date was 11 days after Monique Brooks had died. Graham read the line items slowly. Clothing, kitchenware, framed photographs, miscellaneous personal effects. Then his eyes stopped. Silver bracelet, initials MB, private hold. Not donation display. Under the printed receipt was a second slip, handwritten, with a pickup time of 7:40 p.m. and a signature he could not place. Outside the ballroom, the rain softened, and for one strange second the room breathed with it. A waiter in the corner set down a glass too hard, and the tiny clink of crystal made Caroline flinch. Graham turned the receipt toward her. Why would your charity have a private hold on Monique's bracelet? Caroline's face settled into sadness now, a practiced sadness, the kind that asked to be believed because it looked tired. We process hundreds of estate donations, she said. You know that. My staff handles acquisitions. I don't read every receipt. Amara pointed at the handwritten slip. Then why is your perfume on it? The sentence was small, almost childish, but it made Graham look again. The paper carried a faint trace of the same sharp floral scent he had noticed that morning, the one hidden beneath the roses. Caroline gave a soft laugh. That is absurd. But Graham was no longer watching her. He had seen the pickup time. 7:40 p.m. That same night, Caroline had told him she was at dinner with Evelyn, discussing wedding seating and foundation donors. He remembered because he had called her at 7:52, and Evelyn had answered Caroline's phone, saying Caroline was in the powder room. Slowly, Graham looked from the receipt to his mother. Evelyn's pearls sat perfectly against her throat, but her hand had closed around her clutch so tightly the clasp had left a mark in her skin. Graham did not ask Evelyn why her hand was trembling. He did not ask Caroline why the scent on the receipt matched the perfume in the bridal room. Questions like that gave practiced people time to build doors. Instead, he folded the receipt once, carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his tuxedo. Peter, he said, still looking at his mother. I need my private counsel. Peter's face tightened. I am your counsel, Mr. Whitmore. Not today. The words were quiet enough that most guests did not hear them, but the people who mattered did. Evelyn's chin lifted. Caroline's eyes cooled. Graham turned slightly toward the head of estate security standing near the ballroom doors. Bring me the camera logs from the bridal suite hallway, the service entrance, and the west storage room. Today's footage and the archive from the night of March 10th. The guard hesitated. Sir, during the ceremony? Now. No anger. No volume. Just the kind of calm that made employees move quickly. Caroline stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Graham and those nearest could hear. You are letting this become ugly. Graham looked at her then. It already was. I'm only starting to see where. For the first time, Caroline had no ready answer. Amara stood beside the aisle rope, still holding the blue handkerchief, Her small fingers locked around the bracelet. A server tried to offer her a glass of water. She shook her head politely. "I don't need anything," she said. "I just need nobody to say my mama stole." That sentence did what tears would not have done. It made the room ashamed without giving anyone the comfort of pity. Graham heard a soft sound behind him. A spoon touching the side of a glass, again and again, from an older woman at table 7 who had stopped pretending not to listen. Outside, rain slid down the tall windows in thin silver lines. For 10 seconds, there was nothing but that rain, that spoon, and the muted hum of the chandeliers overhead. Then Graham's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, saw the name of his actual personal attorney, Denise Caldwell, and answered with his back half turned from Caroline. He did not explain the scandal. He only said, "Denise, preserve everything tied to Monique Brooks, Mercy General, Vance Charitable Acquisitions, and my mother's office. No one deletes a file. No one moves a record. Send someone here." Denise asked one question, and whatever it was made Graham's eyes drop to the receipt again. "Yes," he said. "The woman from Baltimore." Evelyn took one step forward. "Graham, you're humiliating your family." He looked at her, and the strange part was that he did not look wounded yet. He looked like a man measuring the room after realizing the walls had been painted over a door. The security guard returned carrying a tablet. His face was pale now. "Sir," he said, "there's an issue with the footage." Peter moved fast. "That can wait." Graham held out his hand. The guard gave him the tablet. The bridal suite camera showed Caroline entering at 5:18 p.m., her maid of honor at 5:22, 2 stylists at 5:29. Then the file jumped. 7 minutes were missing. When the image returned, Caroline was alone, standing near the vanity, rubbing her bare wrist. Graham looked at the timestamp, then at Evelyn, then down at Amara's bracelet. He had spent 20 years believing Monique had left him for money, and now, in the cold glow of a security screen, he understood he may have mistaken the abandoned for the betrayer. Graham did not accuse anyone when the 7 missing minutes appeared on the tablet. He only turned the screen face down on the nearest linen-covered table, as if setting down a glass that might break if handled too quickly. "Caroline," he said, his voice calm enough to make the word feel colder than anger. "You said the bracelet was purchased as an antique for the wedding." Caroline's shoulders eased slightly, because this was a question she could answer. "Yes," she said, "through the Foundation's acquisition department. It was part of the something old tradition. I thought it was sentimental." Graham nodded once. "Then say it again." She blinked. "What?" "Say exactly where it came from." A small red light on the security tablet began to blink. The guard had quietly started a live recording at Graham's instruction. Peter saw it and opened his mouth, but Denise Caldwell, Graham's private attorney, had just entered through the side doors in a dark raincoat and gave him one look that made him close it. Amara stood near Graham's right side, the bracelet wrapped again in the blue handkerchief. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying grown-up truth in a child's pocket. Caroline lifted her chin. "It came from a charitable estate collection. I don't know every donor's name." Graham turned to Amara. "What did your mother tell you to remember?" Amara looked at the floor first, then at Caroline's shoes, white satin untouched by rain. "The lady at the hospital had a voice like she was smiling when she wasn't," Amara said. "And she kept calling the bracelet a trinket." Caroline's expression barely shifted, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her bouquet. Graham looked back at her. "Did you ever call Monique's bracelet a trinket?" "Of course not," Caroline said too quickly. Evelyn stepped in, smooth and firm. "This is cruel, Graham. You are asking your fiancée to defend herself against a grieving child's memories." "No," Graham said. "I'm asking her to tell the truth about a word." The room went quiet around that one small word. A phone vibrated on the table, Peter's phone, buzzing against the silverware, but no one touched it. Denise placed an unopened envelope beside Graham. "Mercy General sent over the intake note," she said. Preliminary copy. The nurse on duty is willing to speak by video. Caroline looked at the envelope, then at the blinking red light on the tablet. For the first time, she seemed to notice how many people had stopped protecting her and started watching her. Graham did not open the envelope yet. Instead, he slid a glass of water toward Amara. "Take your time," he said. Amara wrapped both hands around it but did not drink. "The nurse wrote down what the lady said," she whispered. "Because my mom started crying." Evelyn's face hardened. "Children mishear things." Amara looked at her. "I was sitting under the blanket chair. No one understood at first." Then she pointed toward the photograph still lying on the table. "Moms put coats over little kids when hospitals get cold. Grown-ups forget we can still hear." Graham's eyes softened for 1 second, then went still again. He finally opened the envelope. His gaze moved across the page, line by line. He did not read it aloud. He only turned it toward Caroline. The nurse's note recorded one sentence spoken by the visitor at Monique's bedside. "Give me the trinket and maybe your daughter gets help." Caroline stared at the paper, and in that silent second she understood the little girl with wet shoes was no longer standing alone. Caroline did not deny the nurse's note. Not immediately. She looked at the paper as if it were a stain she could still fold away if everyone would stop staring. Then she gave a quiet, wounded laugh and turned toward the guests beyond the side room. Toward the donors, directors, judges, and family friends who had spent years believing her voice before hearing anyone else's. "A nurse misunderstood a private conversation," she said. "I was trying to help." Evelyn stepped beside her, no longer mother of the groom, but general of a house under siege. "Enough," she said. "Graham, you have embarrassed Caroline, frightened this child, and dragged the Whitmore name through a circus. End it now." Amara's hand moved into her pocket. It was such a small movement that Peter almost missed it. Graham did not. "What is it?" he asked. Amara pulled out an old phone with a cracked black screen and a purple sticker half peeled from the back. It was not a phone a wealthy child would carry. It was heavy, scratched, held together near one corner with clear tape. "It was my mom's," she said. "It doesn't call anymore unless it's plugged in, but it still keeps sounds." Caroline's eyes changed. Not much, just enough. The soft bride vanished for less than a second, and something bare looked out. "That belongs to an estate file," Peter said quickly. "It should not be handled by a child." Amara backed closer to Graham, not behind him, beside him. "My mom told me to keep it because people with clean hands sometimes use dirty words when nobody important is listening." Denise Caldwell quietly took a small charging cord from a staff member and plugged the phone into the audio table. A green battery symbol appeared, dim and trembling. The ballroom speakers gave a low pop. Every conversation died. Even the rain against the windows seemed to step back. Amara pressed the recording with her thumb. For 3 seconds, there was only hospital room noise. A monitor beeping, a cart rolling past, Monique Brooks breathing weakly, a television murmuring from another bed. Then Caroline's voice filled the ballroom. Not loud, not dramatic, just cold enough to be real. "Give me the trinket, Monique. After the wedding, no one will care what you say you had with Graham." A small sound came next, Monique trying to speak. Caroline continued. "You had your chance years ago. You signed. You disappeared. Let the child have help and stop pretending love makes you important." Graham's face lost all color. His eyes stayed open, but something behind them went still, as if the man he had been for 20 years had finally heard the door lock from the other side. Then Evelyn's voice entered the recording, lower, older, unmistakable. "Graham believed the first lie because he wanted the pain to make sense. He will believe the last one because it is easier than shame." No one moved. Graham looked at his mother, and for the first time in his life she looked away first. The recording was not finished. Monique's voice came through, fragile as paper but clear. "If my daughter ever finds him, don't let them make her feel small." Amara lowered her hand from the phone. She was not smiling. She was not crying. Graham stared at the cracked screen, unable to speak, because the truth had not arrived shouting. It had arrived in his own house, through a dead woman's phone, held by a child he had almost let security remove. At last, he placed the bracelet, the receipt, the nurse's note, and the old phone side by side on the white wedding table. Then he looked at Denise and said calmly, "Seal the doors." The doors did not slam. They closed with the soft, expensive click of a house that had always known how to hide things politely. That made the silence worse. Denise Caldwell lifted her phone and began, speaking in a low, precise voice to another attorney, then to a preservation specialist, then to someone from the county clerk's office. Security no longer faced Amara. They faced the exits. Caroline stood in her wedding gown with the bouquet hanging at her side, the white roses bruised where her fingers had crushed them. Evelyn Whitmore did not sit down. She looked at Graham as if she could still command him with disappointment alone. For 45 years, that look had worked. This time, Graham picked up the wedding ring from the marble, walked to Caroline, and placed it gently in her palm. "There will be no marriage," he said. Caroline's lips parted, but no sound came out that could save her. Graham turned to the board members of the Whitmore Foundation seated near the front. Effective immediately, Caroline Vance is removed from all foundation authority pending investigation. Freeze every Vance acquisition account. Preserve every file tied to Monique Brooks. Peter Hensley took one step back, but Denise was already looking at him. "And Mr. Hensley," Graham added, "you will surrender all records involving my mother's office and Mercy General. If one page disappears, I will know whose hands were near the drawer." Evelyn's face hardened. "You would do this to your own family?" Graham looked at her for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was not cruel. It was worse. It was awake. "You did this to mine." No one clapped. It was not that kind of justice. It was the kind that made people lower their eyes because they remembered where they had been sitting when they chose silence. Graham turned back to Amara. She was still holding the blue handkerchief, but now her shoulders had loosened just enough for her to breathe. He knelt on one knee, not as a billionaire rescuing a poor child, but as a man asking permission from someone he had failed before knowing her name. "I won't decide your life in this room," he said. "Not after they decided your mother's." Amara studied him carefully. "Then say her name," she whispered. Graham stood, faced the guests, the cameras, the lawyers, the staff by the kitchen doors, and said, "Monique Brooks was not a liar. She was not a thief. She was not a woman who disappeared for money. She was silenced by people with my name, and I believed them because believing them hurt less than asking the truth." The words seemed to change the room. Not quickly, like light entering through a door opened an inch. In the weeks that followed, Caroline lost her role at the foundation and became the subject of a civil fraud investigation. The Vance acquisition accounts were audited. Peter resigned before the board could remove him. Evelyn was stripped of every formal role in Whitmore Global and barred from foundation decisions. Mercy General released the archived notes, and Graham's attorneys reopened every document Monique had been forced to sign. Her hospital bills were cleared, but Graham did not call it charity. He called it evidence of a debt. Amara was given an independent lawyer, a safe home with her aunt, counseling, school support, and a trust no one in the Whitmore family could touch without court oversight. Months later, in Graham's quiet kitchen, far from chandeliers and cameras, Amara sat at the counter in a new navy coat, eating grilled cheese cut into triangles. The old phone rested beside a framed photograph of Monique, not hidden now, not wrapped away. Graham poured a full glass of milk and placed it near her plate. Amara looked at the picture, then at him. "She would have liked it quiet," she said. Graham could not answer for a moment, because in that small, bright kitchen, the truth had finally become louder than power, and the child everyone tried to dismiss had finally been heard.